All the Mets needed to win on Monday night was 2 runs, but they failed to even scratch one, getting shut out in an embarrassing loss.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. I've been covering the New York Mets on this show since the 2019 season. It's the only podcast that covers the Mets 7 days a week throughout the regular season. If you want to find some of my road work, you can do so over at justbaseball.com, where I work as the editor-in-chief. This episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Going into this start on Monday night, Aaron Nola had pitched to an ERA well over 6. He had a 6.16 ERA in his first 9 starts this season before getting hurt. And then since coming off the IL, he had pitched to an 8.38 ERA over 4 starts. Against the Mets, 6 scoreless innings. 6 scoreless. They only managed 3 hits and 2 walks against him, and they just could not get anything going. Now, Aaron Nola pitched well in this game. He mixed his pitches well. He was in command. He, had a great idea what he was trying to do against this Mets lineup, and he did set them up a couple times, and he certainly did a good job. And I wouldn't say, it's all just the Mets that blew this game, and not give any credit to the guy throwing the ball on the other side. With that said, this was not Hunter Green on Sunday. When it came to the Mets losing that game against Hunter Green, they were justified to have not gotten anything other than a Brett Beatty solo home run. And they couldn't even manage that. There wasn't a single Met that could even just square up one of Aaron Nola's fastballs, which would have completely changed the game because you lose 1-0. So you do better against Hunter Green when he was dotting 101 with a slider that was coming in at 90 miles per hour. It was Edwin Diaz for 7 innings with Hunter Green. And honestly, he even looked better than Edwin Diaz. Hunter Green was dominant. That was a loss that you could look back on and say, yeah, the Reds won that game. And not to take things away from Philly, but Aaron Nola's not that great on Monday night. The Mets made him look good. The Mets did not capitalize on some opportunities that they had. They just went out quietly. Juan Soto in the first inning draws a walk. Pete Alonso comes up with a runner on base, strikes out on a changeup that got a lot of plate. It's a bad at bat. Then you had Nimmo hit one hard, and Harrison Bader was able to run it down and hit it to the one part of the ballpark that you can't in Philly, because if you go down either line, you have a really good chance of hitting a home run, but he went more dead central, and unfortunately, Bader had room to catch it. Second inning, you get singles by Jeff McNeil and Brett Beatty. So you had runners at first and third with 2 outs for Cedric Mullins. And Mullins looks at a first pitch fastball that was belt high inside, just stares at it. Looks at another pitch that was a ball, and then swings at 3 pitches outside of the zone. 2 of them he fouls off. The third one he swings through, striking out. Wasted opportunity. Third inning, Pete Alonso with a 2-out double. Brandon Nimmo strikes out looking after that. Now Nimmo, struck out on what was a pretty good sequence for Aaron Nola, I will say, because on the 4th pitch of the at-bat, he elevated a 4-seam fastball. And then the next pitch, he goes with the sinker up in the zone. That did just catch the top of the zone. So he got Nimmo, already looking up, and he was probably identifying, that's a fastball that's out of the zone, and it just dropped down and catches the top of the zone. But at the same time, it was a heater. It was up, and it was center of the plate, and Nimmo couldn't pull the trigger on it. It was a good sequence. At the same time, though, it was a hittable pitch as well. At least one that he could have hung in on the at-bat and seen what happens from there. 4th inning, Mark Vientos gets a cookie. 2-0 sinker down the middle, just gets under it. That's the difference. Mark Vientos doesn't get under that, hits a home run, completely different ball game. Francisco Alvarez gets a cookie as well. Fastball right down the middle. Even more down the middle, even more center cut than what Vientos got. Swings right through it and then grounds out on a knuckle curve. 5th inning, Brett Baty, leadoff walk. Cedric Mullins goes to bunt, and I don't know if he was supposed to bunt as a sacrifice. If he was, he squares way too late, pops it up, and it's caught by JT Realmuto. Just an easy out for Nola. Then after Francisco Lindor flies out, Brett Baty gets picked off with Juan Soto up. Which you can't happen. And I know there was, some debate over whether the Phillies waited too long to challenge it. Regardless, Brett Baty cannot get picked off in that situation. 6th inning, Aaron Nola goes through Juan Soto, Pete Alonso, and Brandon Nimmo 1-2-3. Again, Nola pitched well. But when you lose 1-0, there were opportunities in that game that the Mets did not capitalize on. 7th inning, David Robertson came in, disposed of Mark Vientos, Jeff McNeil, and Francisco Alvarez in order very easily. 8th inning, they empty the bench of righties against Matt Strahm. You had Starling Marte hit for Brett Baty. He popped out. You had Acuna pinch hit for Cedric Mullins, which I think was actually the biggest mistake of the game for Carlos Mendoza. Not that Cedric Mullins looked great in this one, but at some point, you got to pay attention to the splits. And Cedric Mullins this year has been better against left-handed pitching than right-handed pitching. And you burned your speedster for a pinch hitting opportunity where, sure, in the final segment today, I might actually talk about how I'd rather see Acuna potentially start some games in center field in this series than just to see the Mets run out Mullins because of how bad his at-bats are. But also in that spot with nobody on, 1 out, you burned your best pinch runner, and that came back to bite you in the 9th inning, and Acuna didn't do anything against Strahm anyway. He flew out. And I mean, I guess theoretically, if you wanted to say, well, you pinch hit Marte for Baty, so you need to get an infield in there, maybe just let Baty hit against the lefty. I maybe would have preferred to see that. I don't even know, because obviously what they didn't work, but we'll get to the 9th inning side of it where I think it really cost the Mets, because Lindor walks and then Soto hits one hard, but Stott makes a nice play on it. And so the Mets do nothing there. But in the 9th inning, Pete Alonso leadoff single, and here's where the move the inning power comes back to bite you, because all you have off your bench to pinch run is Ronnie Mauricio. And Ronnie Mauricio can steal bases, but he's not a good base runner. He has learned how to steal bases, but he does not have really good IQ on the base pass. And he gets a terrible read on a Mark Vientos double. Nimmo lined out prior to that, but Vientos doubles into the right field corner. Mauricio gets a bad jump, doesn't have enough speed, and gets held up. If you have Acuna on first base in that spot, he reads it off the bat, he flies around the bases, he scores easily, it's a tie baseball game. You get Jhoan Duran, you have 2 hits off Jhoan Duran, a leadoff single by Alonso, and you get the double from Vientos. You need to score in that situation in the 9th inning. You have to. And the way the game was managed, you didn't have the right pieces in place. And look, I don't want to pin the whole game on Carlos Mendoza. That's not what I like to do. I'm not the guy that is criticizing the manager every single show. But lately, you've heard me point out some things that Mendoza has done, because he continues to push all the wrong buttons. It could just be one of those years. Managers have bad years just like players have bad years. And last year, Carlos Mendoza made a lot of in-game managerial decisions that did pay off for the Mets, and he was pushing the right buttons, and maybe that was just a better baseball team than this one. Not a more talented baseball team, which we keep on hearing after games, where, Pete Alonso, we know how much talent we have in this room, we just have to get there. Well, you keep saying that, and then if you don't get there, you're going to look really stupid at the end of the season. I'm just saying. Like, at a certain point, there needs to be urgency, and not that there's a lack of effort from this team, but this team just has a lack of killer instinct. They still have yet to win a game when they're trailing going into the 9th inning. And this is a game they could have won. Look, Jeff McNeil came, a foot shy of a double that would have given the Mets a 2-1 lead. Had a really good at-bat against Duran, and then he ultimately strikes out because that ball went foul, and he ends up striking out. And that was pretty much the game, because Alvarez had no shot against Duran. Swung at 3 knuckle curves that were in the other batter's box. I mean, just a horrible at-bat with 2 runners in scoring position and a chance. Again, for a single, you would, I don't know if you'd actually, Jerry Young pinch ran. So a single, you take a 2-1 lead, and Alvy just looked awful. But this is just a team that continues to find ways to lose baseball games. That's it. They just keep finding ways to lose. And I don't know if that's going to get to a point here where one of these other teams can get hot enough to catch them in this wild card race. Now, we are going to touch on that a little bit in the next segment. Where are we at this wild card race? I'll give you your update on the Giants and the Reds and the Diamondbacks. But we're also going to talk about the pitching because Nolan McLean made another start. And despite not having his best stuff, despite the fact that the Phillies had a very good game plan against him, he still found his way to a really quality effort. So we'll go through that in just a minute here. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. There is only one homestand left this season. The way things are going, the Mets are going to need to pick up each and every one of those games. If you want to go there, show your support, cheer on the Mets, go to Game Time. It is the easiest way to grab last-minute tickets without the stress. Game Time makes buying tickets fast and simple. Prices on the app actually drop the closer you get to first pitch. They've got incredible last-minute deals, clear seat views, and a lowest price guarantee that takes all of the worry out of buying tickets. Game Time is also the official ticketing partner of Locked On MLB, making it easy to browse the app for an exciting upcoming MLB game. Like maybe on Friday you want to check out Jonah Tong versus Jacob deGrom. That's going to be a great matchup, but that is what we're going to get, and you can be in the ballpark for it. Game Time will take all the guesswork out of buying tickets. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account. Redeem the code LOCKEDONMLB. That's LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. We're getting closer and closer to our next goal of 15,000 subscribers. I would love to get there by the end of the season. We're only about 500 away, so I really do appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. All right, so Nolan McLean took the mound for his 5th big league start, and he did not have his best stuff. He also has a scouting report that's out on him, and the Phillies really went into this game looking breaking ball early in counts, and they were able to use that strategy to get 4 hits against him in the second inning and 3 hits in a row to lead off that frame. Luckily for McLean and the Mets, Harrison Bader was running the bases, and he made one of the boneheaded moves that we saw him make a ton of times last year. This guy can run the bases physically as good as anyone, cuts the corners great, all that stuff. He has a terrible IQ on the base pass. Awful. So many times last year, we saw Harrison Bader try to stretch a single into a double and get thrown out. And that's what happens in this second inning. It turned what would have been a situation where McLean's facing runners at first and third, nobody out, to just a runner on third base with 1 out. And then Nick Castellanos gets a base hit that drives in a run, but he was able to navigate that inning because of Bader just making a bad decision on the base pass. McLean able to get a force out after Castellanos' RBI hit, gives up another single, but then picks up a strikeout to get out of the inning. Once McLean noticed that they were, looking for breaking balls early in counts, he starts to go to his changeup early instead, which is really smart because they're sitting breaking balls and all of them are breaking the same way, east to west. Now you got to pitch in your changeup, which is also off speed, but it's going to go the other way. So he really was able to change up his own game plan, go more changeup heavy, go sinker heavy, go four seam heavy. And then when he did go to a breaking ball or a ball that broke east to west, instead he started going with the cutter a little bit as well. And then he would reintroduce the sweeper on given at bats to guys that just are really bad against the sweeper. So he really did just figure it out. And that's so encouraging when you have a young pitcher that's able to make adjustments on the fly. And you look up at the end of the day, he goes 5 1/3, gives up 1 run. He only issued a 2-out walk in the 3rd inning against the top of the Phillies lineup, but gave up nothing else. 4th inning, Harrison Bader gets a leadoff single. Nick Castellanos flies out. Again, I mentioned Bader running into outs. He gets caught stealing, which helps McLean. He gives up an infield single after that, a ball that just sort of ate up Lindor, a really tough hop. Then he picked up another strikeout to strand the runner and get out of the inning unscathed. 5th inning, he walked 2, including 1 to lead off the inning against Otto Kemp in front of Bryce Harper, but he's able to get Harper to strike out. He walks Kyle Schwarber, which is a pretty good decision, I would say, when there's a runner on base, to pitch very carefully to Schwarber. He then got a ground ball to Brett Beatty, which they just could not quite turn two on. Picked up another strikeout to get out of the inning. 6th inning, he gives up another single to Bader, but then he gets a line out, and that was the end of his day. So 5 1/3 for McLean on 91 pitches, allowed 7 hits, 3 walks, but just 1 run, struck out 5. Thought it was another really strong effort by McLean. And again, the ability to adjust on the fly, the deep arsenal that he has that makes it a little bit easier to make those adjustments. Really impressive to see. And the Mets bullpen was great behind him. Gregory Soto comes in, gets the lefty start out, then strikes out Edmundo Sosa. So he's able to get through that 6th inning for McLean, strand the inherited runner. Brooks Raley comes on in the 7th, gets 3 straight fly balls, goes through Kemp, Harper, and Schwarber. Ryan Helsley comes on with a 1-0 game, and he kept it there. The best he's looked in weeks. Gets a fly out, then picks up a couple of strikeouts. Good inning for him. And that was it as far as the pitching goes, because the Mets couldn't get the Phillies to bat in the 9th as they failed to score there in the top of the frame. So a well-pitched game by the Mets, just a game where they could not score any runs. The Phillies now have their magic number dropped to 11, and they have an 8-game lead in this division. So the division's over. Gary Cohen said it after the game. Any faint hope the Mets had at getting into this division is now put to rest. And I think it was over before it even started as far as where the Mets were at in this division. I didn't think that they were going to really close a 7-game gap with 19 left to play. Now it's an 8-game gap with 18 left to play. They would have had to sweep the Phillies, and even then, it still would have been a really tough climb, because the Phillies are doing a good job against all the other teams where the Mets are not. And so it's not even worth entertaining at this point. When it comes to the wild card race, though, they're letting that door stay cracked open for these teams. The Reds lost, but the Giants won again. The Giants now are 3 games back in the wild card race. Now, the Reds are also playing the Padres, so them losing isn't necessarily even the best thing, because the Padres gain another game on the Mets. Now it's a 3-game lead for the second wild card spot for the Padres, regardless of the seeding come wild card round time. It just would be nice if the Padres stayed close to the Mets. So if the Padres slid, maybe even if the Giants surge, you can still sneak your way in. But it really does feel like it's the Mets and it's these other teams who are just vying to sneak their way in. It doesn't seem like the Padres or the Cubs or anybody else is going to slip out of this thing. So it really does put that pressure squarely on the Mets to get the job done here. They got 18 games left, 3 more against Philly. After this series, you're going to have 15 left. And if the Mets don't win any game in this series and the Giants are able to sweep the Diamondbacks, they're going to be a half game out going into Friday, because they don't play on Thursday. So they can't get it all back, before the weekend, but they'll be right on the doorstep of it. That's a scary place to be for the Mets. Yes, they can go into their homestand, and maybe the Mets, have a valiant effort and they go 8-1 at home and create some separation again. But if the Giants hang in there throughout that span, and then the Mets got to go into Wrigley, and then the real house of horrors, Miami, it gets dicey. It gets scary. There's 18 games left, and there's not a single Mets fan that's comfortable right now. Not a single one. Comment on the YouTube video if you're comfortable and you have complete 100% confidence that the Mets are going to make the playoffs, and then I'll tell you that you're lying. Because as much as we could talk about how talented this team is, and they are, it's just not a team that has inspired that level of confidence. It's been a bad baseball team for months now. And anytime when they start to give you some semblance of hope, they sweep the Phillies, they beat the Tigers, they backslide every single time. Maybe this is setting things up for the Mets to get hot when it matters. But you got to get there. Right now, it does matter, and they're not hot yet. What can change to help spark this team over the final 18 games? I want to go through that here to close out the show in just a minute. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That is where Monarch Money comes in. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you, where you can link all of your accounts in minutes. See clear data visuals and get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. I linked all my accounts on Monarch and immediately spotted a few subscriptions I wasn't even using. I canceled those. I also started to realize, man, I spent a lot of money on takeout too. Started to crack down there. Don't let this financial opportunity slip through the cracks. Use the code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with the code LOCKEDONMLB. If you're an everydayer that always tunes into the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. It's our texting service where you get updates from me. Anytime news breaks in the Mets, you can ask me questions anytime. Take part in our Locked On Mets sign photo giveaways and a live graphic sent to your phone each day so you know who's in the starting lineup without ever having to go on social media. If you want to be Locked On Mets insider, find a link in the episode description or go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Okay, so what else can the Mets do here to try to spark this team? Is there any other cards they have left to play? There's no more top pitching prospects they can call up. They're all here. You can maybe call up Dylan Ross, but is Dylan Ross really going to change your fortunes over the last 18 games? I don't think so. So, yes, it'd be great to get another guy up that throws over 100. Sure, I'd like to see Dylan Ross over Ryan Stanek in theory. Are the Mets going to go to a kid that's never pitched in the big leagues over a guy with Stanek's experience and his track record of turning it on come October? Probably not. So that's not a card they have to play. Tyler McGill, is he going to come back off the IL and give you another good arm in that rotation? Not happening. Tyler McGill got shut down again. He felt elbow tightness after his rehab start on Sunday, and so he's all but likely done for the season. They'll reevaluate. They'll come up with a new plan for him to start throwing at some point and maybe get back for the playoffs, possibly, but you got to get in the playoffs first, and it's just not even worth entertaining at this stage of the game. He's likely done for the year. So when it comes to the rotation, there's really not much left for the Mets to do other than manipulating the order so that they can get as many starts from Nolan McLean as possible down the stretch. They play their cards right. They can still have McLean start 4 more games this season of the final 18 that they play. How they would do that, you're going to have Manaea, Holmes, and Peterson go for the rest of this series in Philly. That's already locked in. But against the Rangers, you would theoretically, if this stayed true as a 6-man rotation, you would go Jonah Tong, Brandon Sproat, then Nolan McLean. I would have McLean pitch ahead of Sproat. This would have him pitch on 5 days rest on Saturday. Then you could have him turn right around and go on 4 days rest against the Padres in the next series, and then that would allow you to pitch him in the Cubs series. Again, if you wanted to go on 4 days rest, you could, which would have him eligible to pitch that game 162 on 4 days rest. So if the Mets want to put the pedal to the metal in one way, it would be getting McLean in there more often. Again, how that would look, Manaea, Holmes, Peterson for this upcoming series. Then you'd have Tong, McLean, Sproat against the Rangers. Against the Padres, maybe you finally go to that Sean Manaea, Clay Holmes tandem I've been talking about. I think that could be a creative way to best utilize those two arms. You have them pitch the first game of that series against the Padres, or you have whoever pitches better in this series against the Phillies get that start. You go David Peterson on 5 days rest against the Padres. That's when he's been best this year on 5 days rest. You can keep him on that schedule. Have McLean go on 4 days rest to finish off that series against the Padres. Against the Nationals, you would go Tong, Sproat, and then again, it could be that Manaea Holmes tandem. And then against the Cubs, the final road trip of the season, if you wanted to, you can go McLean on 4 days rest, and that would keep him available for the final game of the season. Or if at that point you're sitting in a pretty comfortable spot, you can then go Peterson, McLean, and then maybe Tong all on 5 days rest. And then against the Marlins, you just see where you're at. It could be Sproat, Manaea Holmes, Senga, if Senga gets back into the picture, which is really the last card the Mets would maybe have to play in that final week of the season, is if Kodai Senga gets right in 2 AAA starts. But this rotation, you're not going to see much else done other than maybe getting McLean out there a little bit more. But there's no other trick they can pull out of their hat. There's nothing else that can be done. I already mentioned the bullpen. You're probably not going to see anything drastic. I don't know if you see Dylan Ross, and I don't think it really matters too much. Getting Ryan Helsley and Ryan Stanek right is probably the best thing that can happen for this bullpen down the stretch. Now, when you look at this lineup, the only thing that's glaring right now is Cedric Mullins. He has been awful in a Mets uniform. Awful. Let me pull up the exact stats. I got his splits because I want to talk about that as well. But let's first just get the baseline overall numbers out here of how bad he has been in now 30 games with the Mets. He's hitting 174, 284 on base, 272 slug, has a 556 OPS. Was it one home run, four doubles, and a triple? He just has not been very good. Now, on the season against left-handed pitching, Mullins is hitting 286, 374 on base, 457 slug. Against righties, he's hitting a $193, 274 on base, 375 slug. So with that information, why the Mets have turned him into a platoon bat who's only facing righties and not facing lefties is beyond me. But with that said, in this series with three lefties coming up, do I want the Mets to just run Mullins out there every day? I don't really think so, because I can't tell you that I've actually watched Mullins rake against lefties. It's just that's the way he hit in Baltimore. And he hasn't been getting much at bats against lefties now. So I really think it's just stop playing the guy. And it sucks that we've gotten there with a trade deadline acquisition, but he just looks like lost and so frustrated. He looks scared in the box, like he doesn't want to mess up. And that's a bad place to be. So if Jeff McNeil is cool to be back in center field, just run McNeil out there at this point. Because whether it's against left-handed pitching and you got Brett Beatty at second, Mark Vientos at third, and Starling Marte at DH, I think that's your best lineup right now, probably, when you got a lefty on the mound. The other option, if Jeff McNeil is not good to be, running to the ground as the center fielder every day again, you go with Luisangel Acuna in center and Jeff McNeil at second base. I think he'd still probably play Vientos at third and DH Marte. Maybe Beatty doesn't play against the lefties in this series, or maybe you alternate him and McNeil, or again, maybe one game McNeil's in center, one game Acuna's in center, and you mix that up. But I would like to see what Acuna looks like in center field, just because I think he'll bring a lot of energy and athleticism out there, and maybe he makes a game-changing catch out there. I could just see him really making a really spectacular play with his speed. But also, it just changed up the vibes of the lineup a little bit. Maybe that's what you got to do. Just add a spark plug in there. I still think the best option in this series, if McNeil can do it, is just run McNeil out there, play Beatty, play Vientos, play Marte, put your best guys out there, and just ignore Mullins at this point. When you get to the games against righties, I don't think that means, now Mullins can play. To me, those are games where even more so you should be benching him, because he's been bad against righties all year. You could put McNeil in center field, and you can have Ronnie Mauricio back in the lineup and see if you can just get a jolt from Mauricio or even Jared Young. I mean, Jared Young had a pinch hit home run. I believe that's the only at bat we've seen out of him. Maybe he's got another one that I'm forgetting about, but he was tearing the cover off the ball in AAA. So maybe you DH Jared Young, you play Vientos at third, you play Beatty at second, and you play McNeil in center field. I would just taper back the playing time of Cedric Mullins, because it has not looked good. And I would go down with my guys instead of the guy that you picked up at the deadline that you probably shouldn't have in retrospect, whether the Mets really could have gotten Harrison Bader or whether they just stood pat. I don't think they wanted to do that when it came to the perception of their deadline, the fact that they made it pretty clear they wanted to get a center fielder. And yes, Mullins was swinging a hot bat in July prior to the trade, so I still understand why the Mets made that move, but it's just unfortunate that they couldn't pull off the Luis Robert trade. I know Robert ended up getting hurt, but still, it just, I think, would have given you a ceiling raiser, and they didn't necessarily get that with Mullins. And unfortunately, he's even dropped their floor a little bit because of how bad he's played. Now, is there a prospect you can call up that could play center field? Oh, you got Drew Gilbert. Oh, no, now you traded him. I'm not the guy that's going to criticize that trade, though, because I think Drew Gilbert's been a little bit cringe over there in San Francisco. If you've watched, he is a madman. Maybe you needed the energy, though, I guess. You could theoretically, if you want to, go down that road. Oh, maybe you should have traded somebody else in the Tyler Rogers deal. But at the same time, I think Gilbert probably got that trade done, and he was going to be a surplus piece after this season, because you have Carson Bench and Jet Williams, who should be up at some point next season. And so at a certain point, you run out of 40-man roster spots. I don't think that they made a mistake on that trade, but I also don't think that they have anybody now that can come up and help them from AAA, because You got Jet Williams and Carson Bench there, but Jet's hitting 198, 278 on base, 360 slug, 638 OPS. Bench got hurt, so he's only played 12 games instead of the 22 that Jet has played. And he's hitting the $182, 275 on base, 250 slug. Those guys are where they're supposed to be. They should finish out this season in AAA. If the Mets want to send them out to the Fall League, cool. And then next year, they probably start the season back in Syracuse, but you open the door for them to have a good offseason, show up to camp in great shape, and to beat out some of the vets for jobs. But this season, are we going to see one of those guys called up? It is very unlikely. The only guy that's handled the transition to AAA well is Ryan Clifford, hitting 243, 348, 405 slug, has hit 3 home runs, has a 753 OPS there, but it's not like he's tearing the cover off the ball, and I don't think he'd make an immediate impact with his bat anyway, and he doesn't fit this roster. Ryan Clifford, you're either going to play him in a corner outfield spot or at first base, and those positions are all locked up for the Mets. So the bottom line here is, when it comes to what changes can be made for your New York Mets down the stretch, there really isn't much other than benching Cedric Mullins and getting Nolan McLean an extra start or two and getting him into those pivotal series against the Padres and the Cubs. Other than that, though, this team just needs to play better. Their stars have to carry them. They need to score runs, and they got to show some grit and fight. So we'll see if they got that in store for us. 3 more games against the Phillies with your pride on the line, and then 15 more after it. It's coming down to the wire. I would not give up on the Mets, but am I 100% confident in this team right now? Am I nervous? Yeah, I'm nervous. I'm going to be honest. The Giants have been playing some really good baseball lately, and the Mets have not. So we'll see what happens over the next couple days here. But that's going to be all for this edition of Locked On Mets. Appreciate all of you for tuning in. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Help us get to the next goal of 15,000 subscribers. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, being part of our Texan service, you can find a link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen, your first watch every day. Now, for your second watch, check out Locked On MLB Game Night, the show that'll take you around all the action in Major League Baseball with insight from our local experts and league-wide experts that'll take you through all the games. Check out Locked On MLB Game Night on the Locked On MLB YouTube channel, as well as the Locked On MLB podcast feed.